Hey people, if you want to go straight to the review, I guess skip ahead to like here. I haven't talked to YouTube in a bit, so I have a lot I want to go over. I'm going to also spend a decent portion of this video talking about some other Godzilla movies, specifically Shin Godzilla, the one right before this one, which this one is not a sequel to, but they are connected poster-wise. That's funky. And I mostly have to talk about the original 1954 Godzilla, because this movie is a remake of the original 1954 Godzilla, if you didn't know. So spoilers for those three movies at the very least. Now, first things first, before we get down to Godzilla, I noticed this month that my audio setup was somehow majorly out of whack, and I finally fixed it. So now all my videos going forward will have much better audio. Congratulations. And I haven't posted in a while because things have just not been going great for me. I'm kind of in a downward slump lately. The animation studio that I put together my anime pilot ran out of money all of a sudden, and cool timing with that. We at least managed to finish the pilot in time to release it, but I don't know, maybe I rushed it out, maybe I bungled the launch. We only ended up getting about 200 hits, which translates to I spent my life savings and 4 years of work to make 20 cents on YouTube. I'm really bummed out about this. I have to get a new job now. And I have to get a new job because my bills are out of control and I'm in debt all of a sudden. So the anime is paused, but once I get out of debt, I promise that episode 2 will eventually be finished. We have like at least 5 minutes of it done so far, and hopefully we will eventually finish the rest of the first season. I'm leaving the episode up for the time being because I'm hoping people find it, but I'm also wondering to myself if maybe I should pull it down and change some stuff and re-upload it again later. I don't know. Let me know what you think about that. Anyway, yeah, check out my anime if you haven't by now. Otherwise, thank me, comment, subscribe, whatever. Feed the algorithm, do all those good things. Yeah, anyway, that's that. Things have been tough lately. It's another cold winter, and I haven't been able to relax or do YouTube decently lately. There were a bunch of videos I started and just didn't finish. I almost did one about the Scott Pilgrim anime. That was pretty cool. I loved it. There was also this cringy, bad live-action Jigen from Lupin movie. That was just weird. And also there's this like surprisingly real, almost a mecha, almost a car that's making some big waves in Japan. So comment if you want me to finish any of these videos. I also almost pivoted to being a storytime YouTuber because I feel like maybe that'll get me more hits because I can draw. But aside from a fairly interesting Black Friday, my life has sucked lately. So maybe I don't actually have enough experiences to do those kind of videos. Anyway, yeah, let's just talk about Godzilla now, because you know what kind of got me out of my funk? Godzilla Minus One. A movie that I honestly wanted to do like 3 videos about in the past year, but I didn't have time to do them. So now I've got time today and I'll just do all of them all at once. So let's talk about everything. Godzilla. So the last Godzilla movie was Shin Godzilla. It came out in 2016. And there was like almost a 1-year wait because it came out in like summer of 2016 and it didn't come out in America until like the spring of 2017. International releases are hell, but yeah, Shin Godzilla. I kind of love that movie because when I lived in Japan, I lived through the 2011 Japanese triple disaster, the earthquake, the tsunami, the nuclear explosion. And I was personally victimized and damaged by the Japanese government's inept, downplayed reaction to that disaster, and that event scarred me for life. In 2011 in Japan, I had to live through the aftermath of Fukushima, and I came face to face with what I literally thought at that time was the end of the world. And I really can't put into words how traumatizing it is to literally see the end of the world in front of you. Like, I can't really talk about that, but I need you guys to know that that was literally the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Like, compared to Fukushima, the 2019 pandemic was just a non-stop video game Zoom party. Although that was scary too, and people died there too. Now that I really think about it, more people I know personally died in the pandemic than Fukushima, but still, Fukushima like just scared me to my core because I really thought the world was going to end at that time. So back around to Shin Godzilla. Shin Godzilla is a borderline comedy satire of the government's bungled response to the tsunami, the earthquake, how that led to the nuclear disaster, and how they bungled that too. It points out how Japan just managed to write like so many libraries worth of rule books for doing everything, but then froze when they were confronted with something that just wasn't in that plan. And at the same time, they really did nothing for the sake of their own people. And there's a particular part of Shin Godzilla that just straight up moved me to tears, where Godzilla just fucking torches downtown Tokyo, because that's where I lived, and there was a like slow, direct parallel from Godzilla burning Tokyo to the ground to me living in Tokyo and dealing with the Fukushima radiation on a day-to-day basis. Anyway, despite all that, I love Shin Godzilla so much. It's maybe my favorite Hideaki Anno movie. I mean, like, not counting the Eva movies. I mean, I haven't seen Cutie yet, but it's absolutely his hardest and most solid movie. I mean, after that, Shin Godzilla spun off into Shin Ultraman and Shin Kamen Rider. I love those movies too, but they're so divorced from the substantial real-world paradigms that are like on display in Shin Godzilla. Ultraman and Kamen Rider kind of dance around those topics and hint at them, but they don't take like direct swipes the way Shin Godzilla was. If there's only one mistake in Shin Godzilla, I can say Shin Godzilla is not a perfect movie because of its ending. In the last like couple of minutes, they just wrap up things way too nicely and way too properly. And the ending of Shin Godzilla just undoes all the damage Shin Godzilla caused with absolutely no consequences. Like, there's too many loose ends with that. Like, they previously established there were like gunky living Godzilla cells, and maybe those are still alive. So the ending just kind of hit me as hollow when, like, in the real world, 10 years after the Fukushima incident, like, all these major areas of Japan are still affected by this disaster and like laying empty as wastelands and nuclear fallout zones. And yeah, there's that. And then there was also that creepy final shot with the Godzilla people. Now, artistically, I love what this shot says, because it says that Godzilla was defeated by a group of people, so now Godzilla wants to become a group of people. But then I later found out that this was like some weird behind-the-scenes remnant of some weird, insane idea Anno had, where Godzilla would keep evolving into like a human being, and then an angel, and then Ultraman or Rei Ayanami. What the hell? Damn it, Anno, keep your fucking fetishes straight for once. But yeah, despite all that, Shin Godzilla was a massive hit in Japan. It did gangbusters at the international box office. I still don't actually own Shin Godzilla because for some reason Funimation released it on DVD in the US, and I think they did a bad job of it. So I'm hoping that in the future someone re-releases it with more accurate subtitles, because that was my big gripe with the Funimation release. Now, anyway, there were plans to continue the film, because technically speaking, Shin Godzilla does have a sequel. Its sequel is Shin Ultraman. But what people really want is Shin Godzilla 2, and plans for Shin Godzilla 2 were in the works at one time. Now, the most serious proposal was to do a movie called Shin Godzilla Raids Again, which seemingly sounds like it would be a remake of the first Godzilla sequel, Godzilla Raids Again, where Godzilla fights Anguirus, but it would not be that, so no Shin Anguirus for you. Sorry, Anguirus fans. So it's actually seemed to be just aping on the concept of Godzilla Raids Again, where a lot of that movie was just recycled content from the first Godzilla. So what they were proposing was that they would make a cheap sequel to Shin Godzilla by just recycling content. I mean, it does actually logically make sense. They could recycle the CG model and maybe just like render shots from different angles, but Toho shot the film down on the basis that hardcore Godzilla fans wouldn't fall for such an obvious and old-fashioned trick anymore. Though, personally, I'm slightly unsatisfied we didn't get a Shin Godzilla 2. Like, I wanted to see it. I wanted to see all those unused evolutions like actually go somewhere. And there was also rumors that Shin Godzilla 2 would literally just be a movie about two Godzillas. Maybe Godzilla splits in half, because that's what's in the concept art. And then literally there would be two Godzillas walking around at the same time. Maybe they'd fight each other, maybe they'd be friends. I guess this idea was abandoned and it never happened, but either way, I think there's really only two ways you can make a Shin Godzilla 2. It either has to be Godzilla comes back, but this time he kicks the human race's ass and conquers the world, or some new monster shows up to fight Shin Godzilla, and then it's just the Showa movies all over again. Maybe Shin Godzilla will eventually come back in a future Shin Universe crossover thing. Hopefully not the giant robot. Maybe it'll fight Ultraman. Maybe we'll finally get that Japanese Avengers style movie where they all team up and fight. I don't know, who's a famous Japanese villain? The Laughing Salesman, Dio Brando. I don't know. The closest thing we are ever going to see to Shin Godzilla throwing down is just some random pachinko machines where they at least had it like fight the Eva team and like King Ghidorah, and that's about it. Anyway, about a year ago, it was announced that Shin Godzilla 2 is officially dead and not moving forward. And because it is officially dead, we instead got Godzilla Minus One. Now, Godzilla Minus One was initially announced as a straight-up remake of the original 1954 Godzilla, and although not hyped with that, I was okay with that. Now, it's directed by Takashi Yamazaki. He's a veteran director, but he's a pretty low-key guy that I'm not super familiar with, although apparently I actually have seen a ton of his movies. But despite that, I can't really say he's the greatest director or that he has done anything great in the past. Like, he did the two-part Parasite adaptation that I didn't actually see. He did do the live-action space battleship Yamato, which I did see. Now, he did that like 20 years ago, but I hated that movie. It just fucked with the source material too much. Now, recently he's been doing a lot of CGI movies, and some of these have been all right. He did the Dragon Quest movie. I actually love this movie. This movie has an outstanding twist ending, and that movie is totally worth it. So, as far as I know, his best movie is Godzilla Minus One, followed by the Dragon Quest movie. He also did the recent CGI Lupin movie, which was okay. There were parts of that Lupin movie I really liked a lot. And he's supposedly most well-renowned for his own original films, like It's Always Sunset on 3rd Street, and the movie Eternal Zero, a movie that questions the life and motivations of a kamikaze pilot. Hey, wait a second. He ripped himself off. Damn it. Alright, more on kamikaze pilots later. Wait to see where that goes. Alright, so I got to tell you guys, Godzilla Minus One is probably the most perfect remake I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, as far as adapting an old film, as far as changing it around, and especially for a film as revered and as old as the first Godzilla, I'm kind of shocked that they did it at all. Honestly, it's a lot like the Peter Jackson King Kong. I would compare it to that because it's got the same vibe and it's set in the same era, and like, I'm all down for that. You know what? If Godzilla Minus One had Jack Black in it, that would have been astounding. But anyway, so yeah, let's talk about the first Godzilla. Godzilla 1954. The first Godzilla is the most important Godzilla because it's really the major one that's really truly about something. Okay, that used to be the case. Since the 50s, there have been a handful of other Godzilla movies that are about something. Hedorah's about pollution. Shin Godzilla is about the tsunami. But yeah, a lot of the Godzilla movies, at least 90% of them, are fundamentally just about a big dinosaur punching something so hard that it's knocked into next Tuesday. But yeah, to sum it up, the original Godzilla is just a critique of national trauma, nuclear power, and why Japan can't ever forgive nuclear power. The first Godzilla is a film trying to express the pure grief, the pure tragedy that Japan as a nation felt after the bombs dropped after the end of the Second War. And it really embodies that down to this just soulless god monster dinosaur thing. And there's this trauma all throughout the movie resonating through its core, and that's what makes it still a relevant movie over 70 years later. So back to Minus One. Minus One, very interestingly, doesn't change a single beat of Godzilla's actions from Godzilla 1954. The Godzilla in 1954 and the Godzilla in 91 do all of the same shit beat for beat. So that was funky. They start on Odo Island, they go to Tokyo, and they die in the bay. It does rewind the events a few years though. The original Godzilla is set contemporarily in 1954, whereas Minus One is a war period piece set between 1945 and 1947. Does it go past 47? I kind of feel like it did. But anyway, it's literally about and set in the aftermath of World War II. Now, since I noticed Godzilla's path is literally identical to the one he took in 1954, I was wondering if this movie could hold up as a side story, and it almost does, but not quite, because it takes some really interesting and intriguing adjustments towards the ending climax of the film. So that makes this movie a little bit more complicated and a little bit more interesting and a little bit more scientifically accurate than the original Godzilla. So real fast, just for fun, I'll tell you guys all the major differences between Godzilla 1954 and Minus One real fast because I feel like talking about that. Now, before the movie really gets going, this is Godzilla 54, there are some info dumps about the destroyed ships in the ocean and how all the survivors got nuclear burns. Now, this is a real-world parallel for the Daigo Fukuryu Maru incident that happened in 1954, same year as the movie, where a Japanese fishing vessel was downwind of the American hydrogen bomb test in the Bikini Atoll, and these fishermen were exposed to nuclear fallout, and they all subsequently died in a matter of months from intense radiation sickness and nuclear-accelerated cancer, which I just now remember is a thing. Has anyone got nuclear accelerated cancer? I hope I don't get it, because I could. Anyway, Godzilla 1954 is mostly about three main characters. Ogata, a muscular and handsome ocean salvage captain, Emiko, a woman who's just not sure who to give herself to, and the Chad MVP of the film, Dr. Daisuke Serizawa, Godzilla's mortal enemy, and more about him in a second. So, Emiko is set up in this arranged marriage to Serizawa at the start of the film, but dumps him for Ogata because she just decides Serizawa is too much of an otaku. And unlike modern otaku who obsess over having the best anime waifu or video games, this is 1954, so Daisuke Serizawa is an otaku for making weapons of mass destruction. Specifically, his life's work is to make something worse than the atomic bomb, and so he's finally finished his masterpiece, the Oxygen Destroyer, a kind of magic super bomb. This bomb atomically disintegrates only oxygen. And once again, to spell it out for you, all he's made at the end of the day is a better atomic bomb. And this is topical for 1954 because in 1954, the hydrogen bomb had just been developed, which was just a better atomic bomb. So yeah, after nuking Japan, like global scientists had finally upgraded the atomic bomb, and so the Oxygen Destroyer is kind of a parallel for the hydrogen bomb. So is Godzilla. Oxygen, hydrogen, Godzilla, same difference. But yeah, so Emiko can't fucking deal with her crazy bomb-making fiance, so she dumps his bomb-making ass and hooks up with the hunky sea captain. Serizawa also had this kind of like mad scientist vampire aesthetic to him, but that was really just for the sake of it being a movie. Anyway, after that, Godzilla attacks Tokyo, and I forgot this because Minus Zero omitted it, but he attacks Shinagawa, and there's this like whole scene where the government makes a big move on Godzilla of like some tanks and an electric fence, and they try to trap him in the electric fence, and it totally doesn't work because, you know, it's just a fence. Serizawa realizes that only he can stop Godzilla because he has the Oxygen Destroyer. So he puts on a diving suit, jumps in Tokyo Bay, sets off the Oxygen Destroyer right in Godzilla's face, kills him on the spot, reduces him to a skeleton, and as collateral damage, the Oxygen Destroyer goes on to kill every single living organism in Tokyo Bay, a plot point which later becomes the original sin of Godzilla vs. Destroyer, a great movie from the 1990s. Alright, so let's finally start talking about Godzilla Minus One now. Sorry for the delay, I just had a lot to say about 54. Minus One is a full remake adaptation of Godzilla 54, but it is not one for one the same movie. Like, you can watch both and enjoy them both for different reasons. They have different stories. Instead of the three characters from the original movie, this movie is really just about one character. It's about a pilot named Koichi Shikishima, and Koichi is a disgraced kamikaze. He dishonored himself by not dying in World War II. By surviving World War II, he has brought shame to his family, he's got survivor's guilt, and he's got to live with that. Now, on the bright side, he's got a pretty good support network. He ends up meeting this girl named Noriko, who ends up becoming his like pseudo sister wife girlfriend character. She lives with him, but they don't make out or kiss or anything. And through the film, she weirdly like grows from a girl to a woman in like a very blatant way. She also has this baby with her named Akiko, which is just like a random baby she found on the ground. And lastly, there's this guy named Kenji Noda. He's a naval engineer. He's introduced later in the film, but he basically fills in for Dr. Serizawa. by doing all the sciencey guy vibe stuff. But since this movie is not about three characters, it's just about Shikishima. Shikishima has taken on Ogata's role as the salvage boat captain, but he's also taken over Serizawa's role as the only man who can defeat Godzilla and has to probably die for it. Now, rethinking it in this context, the original Godzilla does kind of have sort of a kamikaze theme to it, since it is really mostly about Serizawa going out of his way to build this ultimate weapon and then sacrificing it and himself to save Japan. And what's also interesting here is that in both films, Godzilla is pretty much depicted as a living bomb. But Godzilla Minus One takes that to an even more on-the-nose way than the original ever did, because in this one, Godzilla just straight up an atomic bomb come to life on a level that I've never even seen depicted before. It actually makes the battle between him and Shikishima incredibly personal and incredibly symbiotic, because Godzilla is just this dinosaur who got fed nuclear energy and became a bomb. And Shikishima was a soldier who got fed propaganda and became a bomb, because kamikazes were human bombs. What I'm saying, this is a movie about a bomb fighting another bomb, which, fun fact, is what war is. It's crazy because neither Shikishima nor Godzilla actually want to be bombs in this movie, and yet they both intrinsically have become bombs. Godzilla Minus One is kind of a story about weapons, the need for weapons, the role of weapons, and Shikishima's story as a disgraced kamikaze is just interesting as hell, especially the way they perfectly managed to work Godzilla 54 into it. Because, like, in 54, Godzilla is just spotted and named by the citizens of Odo Island when it attacks there first. And in Minus One, the same thing happens. It starts in Odo Island, but then in World War II, Odo Island is a kamikaze base, and Shikishima stops there to have his plane maintenance, and that's where Godzilla is, and the locals are like, oh, it's Godzilla, and it's tiny at this point. And I fucking love how small Godzilla is throughout this movie. This is the original Godzilla, so he stays exactly 30 meters tall, just like the old song, Up from the Depths, 30 meters tall. Anyway, he's just like that, and I'm all here for it, because I've kind of gotten sick of how big Godzilla is. I mean, they keep scaling him up to make him more interesting, but I think a kind of smaller Godzilla is strong and interesting too. I mean, does it really matter how big it is when he's just gonna step on people anyway? Anyway, I'm pretty sure that in the Odo Island scene, Godzilla is rendered a little bit differently than the rest of the movie, because he looks a little bit more like a normal dinosaur. It's not like Godzilla versus Ghidorah, where it was straight up a normal dinosaur. He's still got the spine plates, but he's a little bit more green. He's a little bit more scaly. He doesn't seem to have his feeling factor yet. And it seems like when they're shooting him here, he actually is taking damage from the guns. So, like, straight up, like, Odo Island was the one time in this movie they could have, like, full on stopped Godzilla, but they didn't do that. The movie really goes out of this way to show the full origin of Godzilla here, that Godzilla really was just a dinosaur who was nuked, and nuclear energy made him bigger and crazier and, like, immortal. And that's always been his story, but I don't think I've ever seen it laid out so literally before, which was interesting. Anyway, so yeah, Godzilla shows up on Odo Island. Shikishima has an easy chance to kill him, and he even, like, gets in the airplane and gets the guns out, but then he doesn't shoot Godzilla, because I think he was thinking that if he didn't shoot Godzilla, Godzilla would just leave. And the movie kind of plays it out like that would actually happen. But unfortunately, one of the other guys immediately shoots Godzilla in the face, so Godzilla gets pissed off and kills them all. Shikishima's knocked out from the chaos, and he is the sole survivor of this attack, aside from this mechanic named Tachibana. And Tachibana makes it extremely clear that Shikishima is a fucking loser kamikaze pilot who's, like, dishonored his family, who didn't fight the fight, and he takes the additional step of forcing shame on Shikishima to make him carry the personal photos of every single man that died in the Odo Island attack, which by all accounts Shikishima does do for the rest of his life because he's so consumed with grief. Anyway, after that, Shikishima goes back to Tokyo. He goes to Tokyo and finds out that everyone's dead except for his next door neighbor who's gone crazy. And then he adopts this random girl he meets and this random baby. and they start this immediate fake sexless nuclear family. And at some point, the neighbor calms down and eventually becomes their babysitter. Now, Shikishima gets a job with the government mine-sweeping mines out of the Pacific Ocean in this wood boat. And on this job, he needs the boat captain, this idealistic kid, and the professor. And then eventually Godzilla shows up again and starts wrecking shit. Now, this movie was apparently lightly inspired by Jaws, which is crazy. They added some crazy tension to this movie. And because so much of the film is actually set in the ocean, I actually almost want to say that this is the first movie that really conveys Godzilla as kind of a sea monster. It also kind of calls attention to the fact that every once in a while you see Godzilla walking through the ocean. And this movie kind of made me wonder, what the hell is he walking on? Because I had previously just thought he was like walking upright on like shallow water, but this movie makes it really weirdly apparent that he just kind of floats there upright. And that kind of doesn't compute to me, but I guess he's just kind of like floating like a guy in a pool in an inner tube. I kind of wish they had shown him like kicking his legs to like make that more obvious. Whatever. Anyway, there's a lot of close calls with Godzilla in the fishing boat, and the Navy gets totally fucked by him, and then finally he comes on the land. And when he comes on the land, the film is just so amazing. The attack on Tokyo ends up being the main core of the movie. And like, I have to say, I was honestly filled with glee to this point, because I realized that the movie was totally doing all the same beat for beat steps from Godzilla 54, and I saw them coming. But when it actually reached those moments, it actually managed to shock me by conveying them in more interesting and dynamic ways, because it's been 70 years. Like, all the same shots, but different camera angles, so much more action. And then at the end, Godzilla basically nukes Tokyo, and it's literally a nuclear explosion right down to like the black acid rain. And on top of that, Noriko kind of dies here, and it's so fucking dramatic. Now, I'm going to maintain that Godzilla Minus One was an absolute perfect film, but there was one thing that dismayed me, that it cut out a lot of the focus the original Godzilla had. Because the original Godzilla was very focused on showing that Godzilla itself was a trauma, and that Godzilla re-traumatized Japan in the exact same way that the war and the atomic bombs did. In a lot of ways, the original 54 Godzilla is just about like processing the trauma of World War II and the fact that a lot of people hadn't processed it. Whereas this, it's literally about the aftermath of World War II. And even though I kind of have a gripe with that, I'm not going to count that against the film, because what the film ingeniously does is that in nearly the same place where those mourning scenes were, instead of showing like all of Tokyo like in the hospital and like crying and singing, they show that Godzilla like personally affected and traumatized Shikishima's family. And most of this is conveyed through like the crying of his infant daughter Akiko. Like, it was so fucking sad, and like it almost made me cry just because I felt so bad for this girl. But I respect this, because in the end it's the same beat, it's just handled differently, which I really gotta respect as a filmmaker. But I will say that cutting the national response for the Godzilla attack makes it more of a personal story, but that also makes everything seem a lot smaller. Like, there really aren't any tanks in this film, and I feel like that was like kind of a loss. Anyway, let's talk about the biggest divergent in the film. So the big divergent point comes when we get to the climax / end of the film. So I really thought, because Minus One was following the original 54 story so closely, that Dr. Serizawa was just going to show up at the end with the oxygen destroyer, whip it out of his ass, and just do like the old, you know, I'm Rick Sanchez bit, I'm going to kill this thing, wubba lubba dub dub. But no, they actually didn't do that, and that fully surprised me. Instead, what they did was just so much more clever. So they also established in this movie that Godzilla has a healing factor like Wolverine. Instead of just making him invincible, he actually does take damage, but the problem is he heals the damage within minutes. So I guess what they were trying to get at was that even though he has this healing factor, maybe it doesn't work as well on the organs inside his body, but I guess in the end it actually does. Anyway, so they come up with this plan, and their plan is to sink Godzilla with Freon and then raise him up with a weather balloon. And through the sinking and rising motion, they were going to kill Godzilla through a massive depressurization mixed with a bad case of the bends. And hey, remember those millionaires who died on that cheap Titanic sub a few months ago? That's exactly how they died. But anyway, I gotta hand it to them. This is a really scientific and rational plan, and it's one that is completely plausible within the time period of 1947. At the same time, even though it's a new plan, it's kind of a nice homage to the original plan, because when they do actually deploy the plan at the end of the movie, all the giant Freon gas tanks look exactly like giant versions of the Oxygen Destroyer. So, I appreciate that. That was a nice throwback. So yeah, anyway, the climax of the film, Shikishima decides he needs a plane to lure out Godzilla. So they give him this experimental prototype World War II aircraft that was stored and complete in a garage. And he's got to finish building it, and he agrees to be this bait for Godzilla. So he puts a team together, and they decide that they're going to rebuild this plane into the ultimate and final kamikaze plane of World War II. Because the last act of the movie, once again, brings it home that this is a character study of this disgraced kamikaze pilot. And it pretty much lays out that in his mind, because he did not die in World War II, he did not finish World War II. He literally says that World War II never ended for him. And because he can't accept World War II ending because he didn't die, he kind of has to die. There's no way for him to live because he didn't finish World War II. It really reminds me of one of those holdout gung-ho Japanese soldiers who were so deeply caught up and brainwashed over World War II that they continued to fight it into the 1970s. But yeah, despite the fact he seems like he's going to kill himself, all his friends go way out of the way to make it abundantly clear to him that World War II did end, it is over, and if he kills himself now, it is not honorable, it is a cop-out suicide. And it would be massively shitty to do that because Akiko acknowledges him as her father, and at this point in the movie, Noriko was thought to be dead. So then there ends up being this massive twist ending that this ultimate kamikaze plane he made actually has a life-saving pilot ejector seat in it. Because remember, those exist on planes. Now, I kind of fully saw this twist coming because they kind of lingered on a few shots of the seat for a little bit too long prior to this moment. And I think when I looked at the seat, I think the seat might have said the word ejector on it in German or some almost readable European language. Either way, the seat says some weird Roman text on it, and I think it says that it's an ejector seat. So I kind of knew that the plane had an ejector seat. So yeah, climax of the film comes along, and they do this whole we're gonna sink Godzilla plan. Shikishima flies around in his plane trying to lure Godzilla out. And it's actually kind of funny because when he gets in the plane, he's finally happy for the first time in the entire movie. But yeah, so the Shin Godzilla plan plays out really interestingly. It doesn't play out perfectly, but every time there's a setback, they manage to work through it. And it ultimately works because everyone just does their best work and tries their hardest. Now Shikishima tries to fight Godzilla off with a plane again and finally bails out of it and uses the bomb to blow Godzilla's head off. And that's basically the end of the movie, but I will point out a few more differences here between 54 and Minus One. So at the end of 54, Serizawa kills himself and Godzilla dies. And then every sequel to Godzilla from 1955 on is just, oh no, there was a second Godzilla. And the second Godzilla is either a nice guy who likes ladies and the Beatles, or he's some evil bastard from hell. But this movie changes the ending, so Shikishima doesn't die and Godzilla doesn't die either. The movie just ends with Godzilla's cells fusing back together at the bottom of the ocean, and it's just oh no, you didn't really accomplish anything. Also, Noriko shows up alive and well at the end to make it a perfect happy ending, where the guy gets the girl and the girl wasn't actually dead. I might have imagined this though, but did she also have black radiation scars on her body? Let me know in the comments if you saw that, because maybe if that's the case, she might actually not live that long, but at least they can settle up their feelings and their business with each other, I guess, and maybe get through their emotional drama. Anyway, in the end, Godzilla Minus One was just a freaking chilling movie, and I love that this movie released both in Japan and America at almost the same time in December, because the Hollywood actor strike has put the situation into play where there's just no movies coming out. I went to the movie theater the other day and they were playing random movies from the 1990s, and Godzilla. And I think because this is a Godzilla movie, we got this movie released here immediately with almost no lag time. And it feels really great to have Godzilla Minus One because it has just such a strong vibe of like a desolate winter, which kind of feels right now because it is winter and it is desolate. And I don't know, there's certain movies that just have this like Japanese winter vibe that really like conveys the experience of like being alone in Japan in winter. And it's this cold and somber movie, and it really conveys what Godzilla is literally supposed to be on such a literal level of obviousness that I've never seen spelled out like that before. But I love this movie. It was cool that Godzilla was just back to vanilla Godzilla with like nothing special and nothing really different about him. I guess the main thing is that when he fires his heat ray like a ray gun, it lands like a bomb, but that's really it. Godzilla Minus One gets a perfect 10 out of 10 rating for me, and I'm actually inclined to see it again. Like, I would actually go see this movie again if it was like playing in like IMAX or with like an English dub. And I literally never say that about anything, but this movie was just like so good and so weirdly calming and peaceful in a way that I did not expect it to be. Please leave a comment if you want me to finish more videos, or let me know what you thought about Shin Godzilla or Godzilla Minus One or Godzilla 54. All right, thanks for sticking with me on this one. This ended up being a really long video because I just haven't done anything in a while and maybe I had a lot to say. If you want to support the channel once again, please watch and share my anime because I made an anime, or donate to my Patreon because I went into debt making an anime. Okay, thanks. See you guys later.